Young, black, gifted, and a superhero? They say following your family's footsteps is difficult, but this character makes being a woman of steel look like light work.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie, and make it look easy.
For those unfamiliar, Natasha Irons is the niece of John Henry Irons, aka Steel, who made her first appearance in Steel Volume 2, Number 1 in 1994 and is a creation of Louise Simonson, John Bogdanove, and Chris Batista. Natasha grew up being very close with her uncle John, having been mostly raised by him due to her biological father being incarcerated. This was mostly the case during the New Earth continuity. Much like all DC Comics characters who were created before 2011, Natasha Irons is once again a tale of two DC Comics origins. I've talked off and on a bit about the difference between New Earth continuity and Prime Earth continuity, and just for the sake of brevity, I'll just say that anything that happened in DC Comics after 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths and before 2011's New 52 is considered New Earth continuity. Everything that happens after 2011 is considered Prime Earth continuity. And in regards to Natasha Irons' New Earth continuity, she spent a lot of time with her uncle due to the fact that her father was originally killed but ultimately came back as the villain Crash, and was an off and on villain who popped up here and there over the course of Steel's solo series back in the 1990s. The only real difference in the Prime Earth version of Natasha Irons' origin is that her father, once again, spent a lot of time in prison, just the same as her original New Earth counterpart, but instead of just spending time around John Henry Irons, she also spent a lot of time with her aunt, Lana Lang, aka Superwoman. The other major difference between the Prime Earth and New Earth versions of Natasha Irons is that the New Earth version of Natasha Irons had to deal with something that the Prime Earth version of Natasha didn't have to, and that is sexual assault and domestic violence. While I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this particular aspect of it, it is still at the very same time very informative about Natasha Irons' beginnings. That during the Christopher Priest run on Steel, specifically in issues 40 and 41, Natasha was beaten down by a drug dealer and pimp by the name of Kilo. And it's even heavily implied that he attempted to sexually assault her. And while we never learn anything much more about that particular incident other than the fact that he wasn't successful in his endeavors to Natasha Irons, he did no less sexually assault her. There was also the issue of taking drugs to gain superpowers in the New Earth continuity of Natasha Irons, but I'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. But other than that, there are some things I'll bring up a little later in this video when they become relevant. But getting back to the character herself, she is a genius level intellect similar to her uncle, and eventually became one of the main sources of John's tech in his version of the steel armors that he wore. If he didn't make it himself, it was almost always safe to assume Natasha made it for him. Her area of expertise is also very similar to John's, focusing her studies in electrical and mechanical engineering. She is even proven capable enough of an engineer that she reprogrammed Superman's Kryptonian robot Kelix to speak with a more hip-hop dialect. She was also able to help rebuild the Fortress of Solitude alongside her Uncle John. And while she doesn't possess a degree in medicine, she does have some knowledge of emergency medicine evidenced in her quick thinking when attempting to save her Uncle John's life after an encounter with Doomsday. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Natasha's powers and abilities, but they were definitely far more advanced versions of her Uncle John's version of the steel armors, so I won't be doing any deep dives into it, only talking about the major differences. If you want to know more about those abilities, check out this video I have linked here, and you can learn all about the armor that both versions of Steel employ. If you've seen my video for John Henry Irons, aka Steel, unless I say otherwise in this video, assume her armor can do everything her uncle's can. Speaking of, her version of the steel armor is more durable than the original armors that John wore as Steel. Where some of John's later armors used dampening fields as opposed to armor plating, Natasha's armor utilized a malleable steel alloy that was very resistant to most forms of damage. The armor's biggest difference other than durability was how it allowed Natasha to alter her size, making her capable of shifting her overall height and size up to a maximum of 60 feet. The strength augments her armor provides also seem to become more powerful in proportion to how much she alters her overall height and mass. Her power armor also swapped out the rivet cannons for a plasma cannon and sonic emitters mounted on her wrist gauntlets. Natasha's version of the kinetic hammer that her Uncle John also used functioned pretty much identically to John's, with little in the way of differences outside of its shifting size to match whatever height and mass Natasha was at the time. During New Earth continuity, Natasha didn't always have power armor. She would initially take Steel's armor out on a test drive that went about as well as you would probably imagine at the time, 16-year-old Natasha Irons trying to wear a suit that was built for a grown man the size and frame of John Henry Irons. Now, earlier I mentioned that Natasha Irons had also taken drugs before, and that was a part of Natasha's build-up towards becoming her own superhero, but in this particular case, shortly before the Christopher Priest run, she took a substance called tar in Steel number 26. This substance gave her superhuman strength and durability, and probably even some other powers that we never really got to see because she only took the drug the one time. But let's just say her strength levels were high enough that she was able to punch the head of Steel's hammer and completely obliterate it, all without suffering any form of injury. But this wasn't the only time she ever had actual superpowers. She would later harness metahuman capabilities under the same circumstances John did during the Everyman project that Lex Luthor had inflicted upon them. During this brief time, she took on the alias of Starlight. She was able to, without power armor, absorb solar energy as well as other forms of it, and unleash it as blast of light or heat from her hands. The energy she absorbed also granted her physical attributes similar to that of a Kryptonian like Superman or a Tamaranian like Starfire. During this time, she also possessed self-propelled flight and the ability to create light-based constructs similar to a Green Lantern power ring, but on a more simplistic level. Think more force fields and domes rather than things with complex moving parts. She would later lose these powers the same as John did, but she would gain new abilities later when she became Vapor Lock, due to the side effects of being part of the Everyman project. This time, she gained the ability to shift into a mist form that rendered her somewhat invisible and virtually untouchable, even allowing her to pass through solid matter she otherwise wouldn't be able to. She would also maintain the ability of self-propelled flight, similar as when she was Starlight, but she lost the superhuman strength and durability that she had had prior to this. During the New 52, she gained an entirely different armor than what she had during New Earth continuity, granting her many of the same abilities I've already mentioned, but the armor was made of a semi-sentient metal that functioned as a power armor and boasting the same levels of strength and durability as she had before. One major difference between the Natasha Irons of New Earth and pre-Flashpoint continuity and the Natasha Irons of Prime Earth / Flashpoint continuity is that the latter has been diagnosed with ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, one of the most common neurodevelopment disorders in the world that tends to manifest itself as appearing to lack any form of impulse control as well as difficulty paying attention. This is notable because originally, the New Earth version of Natasha Irons was quite focused and very level-headed. That said, her New Earth counterpart suffered from issues with abandonment thanks to her lack of parental figures in her life other than her Uncle John. Despite having no significant time jumps early on in her publication history, she was age 13 when she first appeared in Steel number 1, yet somehow was age 16 by Steel issue number 14. It was definitely a weird time jump that made things a little bit awkward, just based on the fact that she started being drawn as looking significantly older, even though she was still technically a teenager. Another interesting tidbit about Natasha Irons is that, like many others in her family before the New 52 continuity, she knew John Henry Irons was Steel long before his identity was ever made public. Natasha has been a member of both the Justice League and the Titans, as well as Superman's version of the Authority. She's also, like her Uncle John, considered a part of the Superman family, the grouping of all heroes like Superman, case in point, Superboy, Supergirl, Superwoman, etc., who are allied with Superman and are in many ways derivative of him. She's also spent a lot of time around Superwoman Lana Lang, who her Uncle John is engaged to, and by this point I believe even married to, and they are who she currently lives with. And while Natasha has never officially led any of the super teams that she's ever been a part of, she was once evaluated by OG Authority member Midnighter as being the best suited to lead Superman's version of the Authority. Let's get into some recommended reading. I'm going to recommend you check out Steel Volume 2 number 1 to see Natasha's first appearance and get a quick intro to her relationship with her Uncle John Henry Irons. And while she doesn't feature in every single issue, I'd say jump over to Steel number 34 through 52 to learn a lot more about her personality as she had grown up and follow her journey leading up to becoming a superhero in her own right. I'll also recommend you check out Superman, Man of Steel 122 through 126 to see her becoming an integral part of the Superman family. I'll also recommend you check out Superman vs. Darkseid Apocalypse Now number 1 to witness Natasha throw herself into the conflict between Superman and Darkseid to save the life of her Uncle John. I'll also recommend you check out Action Comics number 806 through 808 to see her first official outing as the new Steel. And just like I said in my video for John Henry Irons, I will also recommend the 52 comic book series. Virtually the entire series features Natasha on some level or another, but if you only want the issues that she appears in, start with issue number 1, skip over to issue number 3, pick back up at issues number 8 and 9, then jump over to issue number 17, then skip to 21, and then 26, and then jump over to issue number 29, then go over to issue number 31. And that's where you'll skip over to read issues number 33 through 35, and then jump to issues 39 and 40, and then skip to issues number 46 and 47, and then lastly, issues number 50 and 52. This is largely to see the Everyman Project arc and see both versions of Steel get a lot more to do than what you're probably used to seeing them do in the DC Comics universe, and it also dives a lot more into the dynamic in the relationship between both John and Natasha. I'll also recommend you check out Infinity Inc. number 1 through 12 to witness Natasha's metamorphosis into a superhero with powers beyond her technological gadgets and armor. I'll also recommend you check out Action Comics number 1036 through 1048 to witness her help Superman during the War World saga in an attempt to bring peace to War World. And last but most certainly not least, I'll recommend Superman and the Authority number 1 through 4 to see her teamed up with the strangest cult of personality she's ever worked with before, an aging Superman as well as Midnighter of the original Authority and Manchester Black among a litany of other characters in an attempt to save the universe. Now, a lot of people are probably becoming more familiar with the character of Natasha Irons thanks to the Superman and Lois TV show on the CW. However, that version of Natasha Irons, as far as characterization goes, is not that terribly different from the Natasha Irons of the comics. The big differences here being largely that instead of being Natasha Irons, her name is Natalie Lane Irons. And this is largely because she comes from an alternate reality and is not the niece of John Henry Irons, but the daughter of John Henry Irons and Lois Lane from that alternate reality. Those are basically the biggest departures from that, but for the most part, you're getting roughly the same character. Natasha Irons is arguably my personal favorite version of Steel. I actually like her character a lot more than the John Henry Irons version of the character. Not to say I don't like John Henry Irons, I just feel like Natasha is an infinitely better and more nuanced character than John is, and that's not a dig at him as a character. It's just an opinion of mine. I just like her a lot better, and I feel like in a lot of ways that's by design. Typically when you have a character introduced who has a younger counterpart, you always kind of want to give that character more to do. Otherwise, what's the point of having two characters if they're exactly alike? And while she's only recently started seeing a lot more panel time as of late, I really enjoy the fact that she was featured so heavily in the Warworld arc in Action Comics recently, and while she's never had her own personal solo series, I feel like she's long overdue for it, but she does feature a lot across both Superman and Action Comics. That said, if you like the idea of Natasha Irons as a character, you should check out Marvel's Riri Williams, a character with a similar trajectory, but with the Iron Man twist. And I'll also recommend you check out another Marvel character who you may know by the name of Shuri, the sister of the Black Panther T'Challa, and was at one point in time the Black Panther herself, and currently in the MCU is the Black Panther. If you enjoyed this video, do the YouTube thing. Like, share, and also click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I put out. In the meantime, let me know what you think about the character of Natasha Irons. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.